We're just letting some folks come in, thanks to those who are already here. If you have initial questions, feel free to use the Q&A box, and we will address those at the end of the presentations. Thank you all for joining us. We are just giving it a few minutes to let folks get settled. If you have initial questions, feel free to use the Q&A box. We'll just give it another minute or so as folks are logging in, and then we'll get started. Thank you all for joining us today. I will now turn it over to ASH Executive Director, Laurent Hubert.
Thank you, Megan. So welcome, and thank you for joining us today for this webinar that addresses the intersection of labor and non-communicable diseases, NCDs, so cardiovascular diseases, cancer, chronic lung diseases, and diabetes, for which tobacco is the leading risk factor. The webinar today is co-hosted by ASH, the Child Labor Coalition, and the National Consumers League. Today we will have two presentations followed by discussions and ample time for Q&A. So if you have specific questions for a panelist, feel free to use the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen to ask a question to the panelist. Without any further ado, I will introduce our first speaker, Reid Maki, who's the Director of Child Labor Advocacy at the National Consumers League and coordinator of the Child Labor Coalition. And he will provide a brief overview of child labor in the United States and abroad, including congressional and department labor responses to the problem. I also want to take this opportunity to not only thank Mr. Maki for agreeing to speak at this webinar today, but he's doing this just a few days before his retirement. So I also really want to take this opportunity to thank you, and thank you for this such a distinguished career to protect the rights of one of our most valuable assets in society, our youth. It's an honor to have you among us as a speaker today. So, Mr. Reid, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Laurent. I really appreciate being here. Thank you very much for the invite. I'm going to try to share my screen. Has it the initial screen popped up?
Yep, it popped
Okay.
up.
I'm going to switch to the presentation mode. And let's see. Okay, so yeah, I'm delighted to be here. That's who I am. And I have a lot of slides, but a lot of them are photos. I'll try to go through them kind of quickly. Just a bit about who we are. We're the Child Labor Coalition. We're based in the US. We do have some international members. We have 38 members. We're in our 38th year now. And we have a bunch of farm worker groups on board, and Human Rights Watch, Free the Slaves, some America's largest union, the National Education Association. We have some faith-based groups. It's a really nice mix of groups that all care about child labor and want to reduce it. We work on both domestic and international issues. But our domestic work in the U.S. has been mostly focused on farm work, where because there are these giant exemptions in U.S. child labor law that allow children to work at age 12 in large numbers. And they're allowed to work unlimited hours as long as they're not missing school. So that means that in the summer, they can work 10, 12-hour days in sometimes 100-degree heat. The conditions are really, really trying. I've done some field investigations. I've gotten to witness this myself. This child is harvesting onions. It's heavy, hard work. Use sharp scissors. Um, and So the loophole that I'm talking about goes all the way back to the Fair Labor Standards Act in 1938. And it's one of the reasons the US has never ratified Convention 138, because we're in violation. We're letting kids in agriculture work at too young of an age. Agriculture is one of the most dangerous sectors. The fatality rates, we think, are about 4 times higher than most sectors. The injury rates are significantly higher. So the US really has weaker laws in agriculture than most countries have on the books. I want to show you some faces of farm workers, farm worker children, because the photos I have of tobacco workers tend not to show many faces. But these are some kids I met out in the field, 9-year-old harvesting onions, working with their family. This little boy was working in bare feet in fields that might have been treated with pesticides. He had cut his finger with sharp scissors that he has in his hand. He's not really protecting himself against sun damage, pesticides. He was wearing a soccer outfit. And this was his cousin. So it was a big extended family working in this field. She had her parents and her grandparents. And, it's really in the US, the migrant farm worker community is afflicted with this generational poverty. And, it's really poverty that drives these kids into the field. And in the US, we have, I don't know if this is true throughout Europe, but a lot of the fruits and vegetables are harvested through a thing called the piece rate. So the more buckets Yesenia picks, the more she gets paid. So it really causes folks to work kind of beyond their capacity. And it's really one of the drivers of child labor in the US. If we got rid of the piece rate, a lot of the child labor would diminish. And I met Mariella. She was 10. She was sick the day I met her. You can see how big the scissors are. We see lots of kids, sometimes under 12, working because there are exemptions on top of exemptions in the US. There's a small farm exemption that allows kids to work at very young ages. Okay, so we're here to talk about tobacco. As you folks know, it's one of the most ubiquitous products of child labor globally. The US Department of Labor ILAB team, the International Labor Affairs Bureau, has identified 17 countries that to a major extent produce tobacco with child labor. One of those countries does it with forced labor as well. But that list does not include the US because that wasn't part of their mandate. You can see it's a very challenging crop because it's big and it's wild. In the US, you have to be 21 to buy cigarettes, but you can work in a tobacco field at 12. This makes no sense to us at all. And this problem is, children have worked in tobacco in the US for a long time. This is a photo from Louis Hine, the famous child labor photographer from the early 1900s. And, you can see that it's a challenging crop to work on. So things changed in 2014, about 12 years ago. Human Rights Watch, which is a member of our coalition, came out with a groundbreaking report that really delved deeply into this issue. They interviewed a lot of kids, like over 150 kids, and they found that most of them had reported symptoms that correlated with green tobacco sickness. Basically, the tobacco work was making them sick. And you can see some of the symptoms here: headaches, dizziness, nausea, vomiting, fainting. And the kids who work in these fields, adults too, I don't know if this is true in many countries, but in the US, they tend to wear black plastic garbage bags while they work in tobacco fields. And that is that's a desperate attempt to protect themselves from the nicotine residue that is getting on their skin. And you can see this young girl working with her bag. And you can imagine the tobacco states in the US are quite hot. Temperatures are often in the 90s or hundreds. And it's a very challenging environment. And the tobacco and wearing the garbage bags makes them even hotter. There's a picture of some of the residue, and it's really kind of sticky stuff that just adheres to your skin. There are other dangers associated with tobacco work in the US. This is a drying shed. And so the tobacco leaves are dried on these racks. And you can see how dangerous this work is. Obviously, because of their height, small children may not be up in the rafters, but I think older teens are definitely up there and, in danger of falling and slipping and getting hurt at any moment. A little bit about green tobacco sickness. It's an occupational illness, comes from handling wet leaves. The nicotine is absorbed through the skin, especially in hot, humid conditions. And here's the symptoms again. It's basically nicotine poisoning, but it's a very specific cause, contact with the skin. And there's also particulates of nicotine that are in the air. So it's, you're getting nicotine exposure from multiple angles. Tobacco workers face a real kind of triple whammy of dangers. There's the nicotine, there's pesticide exposure, there's extreme heat. It's really a lot of dangers, including you can see this teenage boy has a like a machete type knife. So there are dangers from that. And you can see the leaves are so big, it would be really easy to hit a colleague in the fields. This girl is only 13, and you can see how tall the tobacco leaves are. So in the wake of the Human Rights Watch report, there was a tremendous media storm of interest. This is a Washington Post article urging the Obama administration to do more to protect children harvesting tobacco. We started collecting letters for Congress to try to urge the administration to make it added to the hazardous work list. New York Times did an editorial, Children Don't Belong in Tobacco Fields. This is an Atlantic magazine post. It mentions, children who are under 12. As I mentioned, there are small farm exemptions. So it really helped raise this issue to the top. This is a piece I wrote for The Guardian of a couple years later. But it really helped us as advocates to work this issue because it drew a lot of attention. Our partner in India, Kailash Satyarthi, wrote a tweet urging Obama to ban child labor and tobacco. And we got some unexpected support from the tobacco industry. There was this trade association type of organization in North Carolina, the Council for Burley Tobacco. They represented 5,000 tobacco growers. And their comment was, we do not condone the hiring of anyone under the age of 16 for work in tobacco anywhere in the world. So that's the start. We really think that nobody under 18 should be working in tobacco. We organized a press conference with Human Rights Watch. So the young woman in the background is the woman who actually did this groundbreaking Human Rights Watch report, interviewed all those kids. And this is a young worker she brought in, Celia. And Celia testified that working in the tobacco fields made her feel like she was going to die. So, it's not an illness that is associated with fatality, but it does make you feel really, really sick. So the Congress responded well. Representative Cicilline in 2014, he saw the New York Times piece and he said, I'm going to introduce a bill to ban child labor and tobacco. And he did. And that bill has been taken over by Rosa DeLauro, who's kind of a mover and shaker in the House, and Senator Durbin. The current version of the Children Don't Belong in Tobacco Farms Act has 62 co-sponsors in the House. So that's a decent number. And we're hopeful that at some point this bill will get through, but perhaps not immediately. We're working another bill called the Children's Act for Responsible Employment and Farm Safety. It would raise the base age of farm work in the US from 12 to 14, and it would raise the age of hazardous work from 16 to 18. Which, another thing that makes no sense about our child labor laws, like why do we allow children to do hazardous work in a sector that is so dangerous? I've talked about what it does already. So basically, if the CARE Act were to be enacted with the raising of the hazardous work age, then we would have to get tobacco designated as hazardous work, and then it would be banned. So, and there was an attempt by the Obama administration in 2009, 2010 to update the hazardous work rules for children, which would have included a ban on child labor and tobacco. We thought it was going to go through. Unfortunately, the farm lobby activated, and the farm lobby in the US is incredibly powerful. And they organized a campaign that said that the rules, they were really common sense safety rules, but they said that if this went through, it would kill the family farm. And we thought that that was not true. The children of farmers and daughters would have been exempted from basically all protections. So there, it was just hyperbole, and unfortunately, they won. The Obama administration withdrew it, and they said they would never update the hazardous work rules during the rest of the Obama administration. It was a complete abdication. And I think the reason he did that was because he was worried about losing a Senate seat or two. And that might have affected the balance of the Senate. So let's go back to the child labor report from Human Rights Watch and the whole year of frenetic activity that occurred in 2014. So Obama's Secretary of Labor, Tom Perez, pulled a meeting together at the Department of Labor with tobacco companies and NGOs. We were in the room, Human Rights Watch was in the room, and he brokered a deal with the companies. And basically, the deal was that the companies would ask contractually their growers not to hire kids under 16. So we were skeptical that this would work, but we kind of felt like, well, we've got to give them a chance, see if it works. We kind of more or less signed off on it. But we have come to the conclusion that it does not work. The federal government collects very little data on child tobacco workers, but we found some ancillary data in a health study by Wake Forest University. Dr. Arcuri had interviewed a bunch of tobacco workers, and he asked them their ages, and he asked them, have you worked in the last week? And more than half had, or the half of the kids under 16 had worked in the prior week. Now, because of the agreement, none of those kids should have been working. So, and we also, we have partnerships with unions in North Carolina, the Farm Labor Organizing Committee, and an NGO called NC Field that works with tobacco kids. So there's kind of universal agreement that it doesn't work. Dr. Arcuri's team, his wife, Sarah Quant, another doctor, Dr. Arnold, has been doing research on this phenomenon. And they have been finding that North Carolina farm workers experience large nicotine doses. The long-term health impacts of these are not well known. And they saw like no attempts to mitigate the exposure. The farmers are not providing clothing or equipment or, showers. There's really like no attempt to mitigate it despite the, apparent danger. And they measured the cotinine levels of the hired youth, and they were about 9 or 10 times higher than non-tobacco workers. So the exposures are very significant. There's no doubt this is happening. It's very disturbing. Okay, so now where are we now? What does the immediate future look like? Well, there are concerns because the Trump administration has not really been very concerned about child labor. Project 2025, the blueprint for the administration, actually made the argument that teenagers want to do hazardous work, so they should be allowed to do hazardous work. It's very simplistic and not true, we think. So that's a warning sign. They actually did an attempt to revise the hazardous work rules, but they announced they were going to do it, but then they didn't follow through, which we were happy about. We're also seeing very few signs of domestic labor enforcement in general, but specifically child labor law. We used to, under the Biden administration, which had pretty robust enforcement, found kids working in meat packing plants and in Hyundai supply, parts supply factories. We were seeing like 2 enforcement action press releases a month on average. And in the Trump administration, we've only seen 2 in a year, and they were both about actions that began in the Biden administration. And there was a recent report from a group called Good Jobs First that found a total collapse of enforcement of workforce protections enforcement in 2025. Cases declining by 97%, penalties dropping by 83%. So this is really concerning that there's never been a lot of enforcement in agriculture, but there's reason to think that there's basically none happening now. And in this context, the LA Times recently did a piece on California's child farm workers. And California, for many of you know, is a very progressive state in the US. It does have a better body of laws for protecting farm workers in general. So this report kind of raised some eyes because they found that there was negligible enforcement of child labor laws in the state. Over 8 years, regulators issued just 37 citations, collected 8% of imposed fines. And, it's a huge state. It has a massive amount of agriculture. The fact that there's almost no enforcement was really disturbing. In the state's credit, they did announce that they were going to try to fix this. So they're instituting some reforms to try to make sure that enforcement picks up. And I'm ending soon here. I don't want to end on a depressing note because it does seem pretty doom and gloom at the moment. But typically, what's been happening in the U.S. is the Democratic Party has been supporting a lot of the child labor initiatives, to reduce child labor. The Republican Party, not so much. So if the midterms go the Democrats' way, Rosa DeLauro, who's the champion of the tobacco bill in the House, she is powerful. She would be the chair of appropriations. It's not impossible to think that bill could move. And the Senate champion is retiring. So it wouldn't be unprecedented for folks who like him to kind of say, okay, well, we'll give him this as a goodbye gift. It's still a long shot, but it's not impossible. So I also wanted to end with, I know there are folks from the US on this call. And if you are from the US and you can take a few minutes to call your member of Congress and just ask them to support the Children Don't Belong in Tobacco Farms Act and protect these kids, it would be much appreciated by us. As I said, the bill is actually doing quite well. It has over 60 co-sponsors. If we get that number up to 100, its chances go way up. So anyways, that's my take on child labor in the US. I hope it was helpful. I really appreciate being here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Reid. And there'll definitely be some questions for you later on. We'll go on to the next speaker, and then we have definitely some questions and very interesting presentation about the status of child labor law in the United States, and particularly in the area, in the context of tobacco, in the area of tobacco growing. I'll hand the floor to the next speaker, Kelsey Romeo-Stuppy, who's a managing attorney at Action on Smoking and Health, and she will expose some of the hidden human costs associated with tobacco and how growers suffer from not only group tobacco sickness, but secondhand smoke and other areas needing attention to address human rights issues. Kelsey, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Laurent. Thanks everyone for joining us today, and thank you, Reid. That was very interesting. I'm going to take it a little more international and talk about some of the ways that we can help to solve this problem internationally. But first, I wanted to bring this back because I'm sure many of you have seen this chart before, but tobacco use is going to kill 1 billion people this century if we don't do something. And I wanted to bring that back around because we're talking about how sick growing the product can make people, but also it's a terrible product to grow at all. So I just wanted to bring that back to our minds as we are talking about this. It's not like it's a product being used for good. At ASH, we like to highlight the intersections between a lot of our work. And I just thought this might be worth looking at. Obviously, labor plays into tobacco control, but also environmental issues, women's rights issues, children's rights issues, other NCDs, and development, which can be an issue for tobacco growing worldwide as well. So all of these issues are interrelated and important to solve together. Thanks to our friends at Unfair Tobacco and our friends in some tobacco control agencies in Africa, we have a few videos to share. Hopefully it works. It's only a 2-minute clip, so feel free to message if there's any issues with the sound, but hopefully it'll go.
স্কুল যাইতে দেব না তামাকের মেলা তামাক কাটাকাটি করছে আকাশ খারাপ যদি বৃষ্টি পড়ে তাহলে তো আমরা দুইজনে গোটাইতে পারবো না স্কুল তো মিস দিতে হয় বাধা করছে আমরা সকালে 7টার সময় আসি ভোরে 7টার সময় আসি তামাক নাড়ি দিতে দিতে দুপুর হয় দুপুরে আবার বাসায় যেয়ে খাওয়া দাওয়া গোসল টোসল করে আবার তামাক তুলতে এসে তামাক তুলে তুলে ইশারাজান দিয়ে গুটে টুটে আবার বাসায় যেয়ে পড়তে বসে আবার একটু ঘুমাই ঘুমে পরে আবার সকালে উঠে আসতে হয় আমাদেরকে
Swaka tilima koma kuchini kambe chazoona tilimira tabe kuvutika kusovavochita tinda nopereka kumaketi koma tikapereka kumaketi tikaona ntchito yamene tapitamo kuyendofika kumaketi kuja tikagulisa chafwaka timapeza kuchipindu yenene pamankhala palibe chifukwa nthawi zina kuti na vana va sukulu koma nthawi zina kuti tikwanirisa ulipirira vana ku sukulu chimatikanga profit yafwaka imankhala ing'ono ntchito imankhala yambiri Nava TPZ vajiwamo ndrama zawo mfoka amene tagulisa ija naveve valiko na percentage amene vamachosamo muja muli ndrama zesa nitapanga so that's why takamati profit imankhala chape ing'ono timaona monga ni ndrama zambiri but zimankhala zing'ono kuti uzisharinga bwinobwino pa nyumba kwanirise na vana chimavuta
tinzira nkhani ya matenda kuti iliko imayambira paja pa nkhani pa nthawi yothyola paja pothyola ngati waika apa Pama ukalowa munda mafwaka vera mseruseru ngati tifuna uluka vera mutu kwa maningi kuli na matenda aja kuti green chani ndo kaya kuchizungu ana kambiri achakala kufwaka na mnei chingiza kone palibe kai sati pasati vose vo chingiriza navo
Have to remain awake the whole night and yet the whole day. Imagine how hard work it is. Start working at 7 a.m., work till noon. The tobacco requires the hot sunshine. While handling the leaves, we inhale poison of the leaves. We feel feverish, we lose appetite, we get hungry, cannot eat. We get severe back pain, as it is a work by sitting and bending down. We get up and sit continuously.
So thank you again to Unfair Tobacco for sharing those videos with us. I think it's really powerful to hear it in people's own words. Let's see, can I get to my next slide here? There we go. So we've heard a lot about tobacco growing and labor, but I also wanted to highlight another tobacco issue with labor, and that is secondhand smoke, particularly in places that aren't protected by smoke-free air laws around the world. Waiters, bartenders, casino employees, people like that are very frequently exposed to secondhand smoke as part of their job. And then there are also job sites that aren't covered by some smoke-free indoor air laws in particular, like construction workers or people that work outside generally can be exposed to tobacco smoke. So this is not just about tobacco growing, and I just wanted to highlight that as well. So now I wanted to switch tracks a little bit and talk about what we can do in the international sphere to help end all of these labor issues and tobacco and to protect the right to health. First, as many of you know, there is a tobacco treaty called the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, the FCTC. If anyone isn't familiar with it, the United States is not a party, but it has a huge number of parties around the world. So a large majority of the world is protected by this. And there are several specific articles I wanted to highlight that deal with some of the issues we've talked about today. Article 8 is protection from exposure to tobacco smoke. Article 17 encourages parties to provide alternative livelihoods for people growing tobacco. As you can see from the video, for many tobacco growers, that's not their first choice. They would be very happy to grow something else if that was a possibility. So the Article 17 encourages governments to help provide for that. And then Article 18 is protection of the environment and of the health of people. Obviously, tobacco growing is bad for people. It's also bad for the environment. And we have done a number of webinars and publications around the environmental impact of tobacco. So I encourage you to check those out if you aren't familiar with that. But there are a number of environmental issues with growing tobacco as well. A couple more articles that are relevant. Article 5.3 is tobacco industry interference. The tobacco industry is often getting involved in farm issues and labor issues as well, advocating against what would likely be the best practices for people's health. And then finally, I just wanted to highlight the tie to development here. Obviously, a lot of the countries growing tobacco are countries that are still developing as well. And this is an issue that needs to be recognized in order to achieve sustainable development. As I mentioned before, the FCTC is highly impactful. It covers 90% of the global population, 182 parties, and it's estimated that over 37 million lives have been saved in the 20 years since it was first implemented. But there are some downsides. The first is that FCTC implementation is slow, and the second is that the FCTC doesn't have an enforcement mechanism. But that doesn't mean all is lost. We therefore turn to international human rights mechanisms, many of which do have enforcement mechanisms. There are a number of UN human rights mechanisms that do have enforcement mechanisms, and that ASH helps our country partners to use these in order to protect their citizens' right to health. One is the Universal Periodic Review. Every country that's a member of the UN is subject to the Universal Periodic Review in a cycle. The cycles are about every 5 to 6 years. The UPR is a little bit longer than other treaties, but it is concurrent, it is happening consecutively every 5 or 6 years. There are also several other human rights conventions, notably the Convention on the Rights of the Child and the Convention on Elimination of Discrimination Against Women. These also have reporting processes. So they require countries who are parties to report back every 5 years or so. And when those countries report back, civil society, nonprofits also have an opportunity to report and to highlight issues going on in country. This is a great opportunity to highlight all of those intersecting issues that I had at the slide at the beginning. Labor, women's rights issues, the right to health, all of these issues can be appropriately placed in a report to these treaty bodies. The treaty bodies can then hear from the country, hear from civil society and other stakeholders, and then they get a chance to report back to the country and ask the country to take some sort of action. So there is an enforcement and a follow-up mechanism in these treaty bodies that provides an opportunity for advocates to highlight these issues. One example is, as I mentioned, CEDAW. We have had some success with CEDAW reporting back on tobacco. It's obviously when a country goes to report on all women's rights issues, there's a big spectrum that the committee can decide to focus on. And in their concluding observations, they often don't get to everything. So they don't always highlight tobacco. But last year we called it a CEDAW blast, and we made sure tobacco was included in as many country reports as possible for that one session of CEDAW. They hear about 6 or 7 reports at a time. So we got tobacco into 4 of them. And we also were invited to give a presentation to the CEDAW committee on why tobacco is a women's rights issue. So between those 2 things, we highlighted tobacco for them, and we have seen the momentum of tobacco being included back in concluding observations since then. So it's very important that advocates are there because that's the only way this is being included. Countries aren't generally highlighting tobacco as an issue themselves. Um, am I back? I think I froze for a
Yeah, you're
second.
back. No, you're back.
Okay.
You're here.
Okay. In addition to the reporting process, I just wanted to highlight that there are numerous other parallel processes happening at the international level. This is a call for input email that I got yesterday with there's maybe 6 calls for input open right now. And as I mentioned, there's so much intersectionality at play here that tobacco and labor issues can fit into a number of calls for input. There's the special rapporteur on the right to education is calling for input right now. There's obviously educational issues at play here. Children might be missing school. People are not educated about the harms of green tobacco sickness or the harms of labor in general. There are just numerous opportunities for this, and the input is ours for the making here. So, as advocates, it's really important that we seize these opportunities. And then I just wanted to highlight also that a lot of what I've talked about is at the international level, but there is hopefully a trickle-down effect. We want to see those international recommendations being turned into national law and local change. And one example of that was a report that we submitted a few years ago to the Convention on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination about menthol in the United States. That language was actually used in the District of Columbia when they were advocating for their flavor ban. So we're so excited to see these human rights arguments being used at the local, national, and international level. That's it for me. Thank you very much for having me, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Kelsey. And we have ample time. We have a bit over 20 minutes for questions and for discussion. So I encourage everyone to use the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen to pose your questions. But so I have a few questions to get started. The first one, Reid, you mentioned in one of I think it was one of the first few slides on the fourth one, you mentioned tobacco being one of the most ubiquitous products of child labor globally. Can you quickly clarify that? Are you suggesting that globally more children are in tobacco labor than other areas of agriculture? Is that what that means? I just wanted to.
Well, essentially, the product list developed by iLab, counts the number of countries that you can find the phenomenon of child labor helping to produce like a product in significant levels. And so, tobacco, it was 17 countries. You add the US, 18 countries. We don't see too many products that hit that level of the high teens.
Interesting.
Things like coffee we do. Cotton has, I think it's more like around 10. But yeah, so I think tobacco it is one of the most widespread crops that uses child labor. And, it's produced in over 120 countries, I believe. But they've identified these 17 or 18 countries where it's a real problem for child
So
labor.
this is a really worth stressing, I think, given that it's compared to products like cotton that are used and are very useful purpose for the general global population,
Correct.
or even coffee, which is consumed and consume doesn't have the harmful impacts of tobacco. So I think given that comparison, that's significant. If I may also follow up on that, then you both of you stressed the green tobacco sickness, and you mentioned you expanded on this. And I understand that they vary depending on the study, but between 9% to over 60% of those working in the field of growing tobacco end up being victims of green tobacco sickness. And my understanding is children are much more vulnerable than adults. Can you clarify that?
Yeah, so Human Rights Watch, they didn't do lab testing, but they interviewed kids, and the majority, like a significant majority of the kids, I think it was around 2/3, said that reported that they had had symptoms, that correlated with green tobacco sickness. The dizziness, vomiting, headaches, fainting. I do believe that their rates are significantly higher than maybe perhaps other workers.
So we have multiple elements here. Kids overly represented in already a harmful product, and
Yes.
then being particularly also vulnerable to just the exposure, the risk associated with just merely working in that environment.
Yeah, and
That,
exposed to extreme heat at the same time, and
exactly, yeah.
pesticide residues
Under the
and
plastic
dangerous.
bag and the heat.
Yes,
And
and
just
dangerous
imagine
chemical.
the
Yeah. Well,
yeah,
and
how
then
unhealthy this must be.
the irony of the plastic bag is that it causes the workers to sweat more, and water makes the nicotine absorb more easily. So it's not entirely clear if the garbage bags are an effective strategy or not.
Actually be counterproductive and harm more.
Yeah.
Um, I have a question then that will tie to both of you. Reid, can you tell us why the report from the Human Rights Watch report was so impactful and what has changed since? That's to you. And then to you, Kelsey, as a follow-up to this, could are you aware of whether any of this information has been then used to report back to a human rights treaty body that the US, for a treaty that the US has ratified to expose that, and whether it could be used for that purpose? It's a question to the two of you. So Reid, first, if you can address why was this so impactful and what has
Yeah.
changed then, and then to Kelsey, could we use that also as a way to raise further awareness within the UN system?
Yeah, I think the problem was like, so there were those of us who kind of work on child labor issues and farm worker issues that knew that kids were in tobacco fields. But it was really a surprise, I think, to the public that small kids were doing this dangerous work, in decent numbers, and it was just kind of shocking. And I think that's why the newspapers were picking it up and it was getting so much media attention. It had been around for a long time, but it's just not very well known. I will say this about child labor. Um, the prevalence of child labor is vastly uh, uh, misrepresented by the public. Like they don't understand how ubiquitous it is. There was some consumer polling done in the U.S. and they asked consumers, "Well, how much child labor is there in the world?" And uh, and 3 out of 4 people said that there was about 1 million kids in child labor in the world. And the answer at that time, this goes back, I think, over 10 years, but the answer at the time was 162 million. So they were off, 3 out of 4 people were off by a factor of 160. It's really, there's just tremendous lack of knowledge. We've been trying to correct that for 30 years, but we hadn't succeeded, I don't think.
So Kelsey, what are your thoughts on, so obviously more needs to be done, obviously. You mentioned the various treaties that could be used. I know we have a part of the audience today is US based, and you mentioned a few. What treaties does the US ratify that we could use to expose that unfortunately that the practice in the United States?
So you asked earlier if we could use the Human Rights Watch report, and yes, because we have. We used it when the US was due for their Universal Periodic Review earlier in this cycle of the UPR, so maybe 2021. We did a report for the US. The UPR is the one that all country members are responsible for. So the US does have to do a universal periodic review, which gives NGOs in the US an opportunity to report back then. Unfortunately, as I'm sure many of you know, the US is practically allergic to signing any international agreements. So we are tied to very few, but the UPR is one, and the Convention on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination is another, both of which I think this issue is relevant to, and both of which provide an opportunity for us to engage at the international level for the US.
So one of the comments that I'm seeing in the open questions there, it's on the issue, how can the industry get away with this? Are we getting away with it? And there's a few potential. So first, the question would be litigation. Are there opportunities for litigation to address this issue? And maybe Kelsey or both of you, or Reid, you may have an answer to that.
Go
Yeah,
ahead,
go ahead,
Reid.
Kelsey.
Oh, okay. Yes, there's opportunities for litigation always. I think the question is where and who, and lots of issues there. But I think for human rights litigation, this is a ripe area. Human rights are, the government is responsible for protecting human rights. So this wouldn't be against any particular corporation or grower, but against the government. I also think it would be very interesting to litigate against the corporations. But Reid, please go ahead.
Yes, Reid, please go ahead.
Yeah, I think one of the handicaps in the U.S. about litigation on this front is that the work is essentially legal. Even the voluntary agreement with the tobacco companies is not enforceable. So if any, if a Department of Labor inspector saw a 12-year-old working in a tobacco field, there's really nothing they can do. So I think that presents challenges for litigators too. But
Interesting. So social services in some states could not get involved in a case like this if you have minors working under difficult conditions?
no,
Interesting.
it's all legal. It shouldn't be, but it is.
So we have the issue. So we have obviously a major problem with children working under unsafe conditions, working on an industry that sells an addictive and lethal product. So that's one problem. But then we have the issue of the product itself. So when we talk about children's rights and addressing and protecting the rights of future generations, so is it enough to get them out of working in fields, or should we actually even think about phasing out those products that addict, given that most people who use those products are addicted as children? So would it make sense for society and for governments to remove those products that are mostly, in a way, children become addicted to them, but they will have consequences that will follow them through life and really impact their ability to fully develop as an adult? What are your thoughts on
Absolutely.
this? And
Absolutely.
what should be then the approach?
Yeah,
Should we phase out those products out of the market?
I totally agree with you. I mean, it's a product that kills, it's going to kill 1 billion people. I mean, it's insane that it's sold. So that would be one great way to solve this problem of children working in the fields. Just ban cigarettes and tobacco completely.
Yeah, I think it's all part of a tobacco endgame program. I mean, I think we have to think about all of the aspects of this, and children are negatively impacted in so many ways. Tobacco advertising, tobacco growing. I mean, it just from start to finish, tobacco is bad for everybody, but especially for children.
So Kelsey, let's expand on this. When you first started working full time in tobacco control about 15 years ago, more or less, at that time that concept seemed a little crazy. I mean, we thought, well, we've had a treaty, we've addressed the demand for those products. So at this stage, should we, and this is a question for both of you, have we done enough to protect? Have we done enough in the past 25 years? 26 years since we started negotiating a treaty on tobacco to protect kids? What should we do next to fully protect future generations and to have a tobacco-free future, so to speak?
So I can go first. I think I've been in tobacco control 13 years, and even before that, what I had noticed in tobacco is that we've made huge strides in my lifetime and in the past 20, 25 years. I mean, it's changed so dramatically. I have children and they are growing up in the United States in a fairly well-educated place, and they never see smoking of any kind. They're very, very lucky. And I wish that for children all over the world that they not be exposed to that. And I think we're getting there slowly but surely. And I think there are a lot of things we can do to expedite the process. I think a human rights-based approach to tobacco control is a great way forward. I think we are at the point now where many places should start talking about endgame, about ending the sale of tobacco. And I think even places that aren't necessarily there yet should consider leapfrogging and jumping ahead there. I think we're at a place in the world where the tobacco shouldn't be harming people, children, adults, anyone. We have known the harms for so long, and it's time to end it.
So interesting. So this has been a kind of a shift in language, even from the health community. So I'm curious, Reid, are you hearing? So this has been a radical shift. So at least my perception, Kelsey, I don't know if you agree with me, but 15 years ago, even 6 years ago, people would have told us you're crazy when having that kind of idea, that kind of thoughts. And now it's like, how fast can we get there? So my question to you, Reid, is: are you hearing that also within the Child Labor Coalition world and the national consumer leagues? Is that also something that resonates, or do you think it's people would say, "Oh no, you're crazy," if you would propose such a thing?
It's hard to say for me because we do have a health team here that works on these issues, and they might be able to answer the question better. The U.S. is a little bit, it has this kind of individualism streak, a philosophy that makes, I think, passing a complete smoking ban difficult. But I think there's widespread recognition that smoking is dangerous. Most of the restaurants in the U.S. don't allow it anymore. A lot of office buildings don't allow you to go outside and smoke outside the building. You're just not allowed to do that anymore. So definitely the trend, and I think the trend is moving in the direction of a total ban. There's a disturbing problem with a lot of young people vaping in the U.S. and
Yeah.
picking that up, which is really concerning.
So I think you bring a very good point, and it's one of the questions I see also here now from Karen Compton, is we have all those new products on the market, and I was having a discussion, I think maybe Kelsey, you were in that discussion yesterday. Yeah, we were at a call with some European colleagues, and they were sharing with us a concern about there are nicotine products in the market in some situations where there are such high level and context of nicotine, and that delivers so fast to the brain that they're concerned that they're not going to have even any tools to help people quit, because people are going to be so addicted because of those new products that deliver such high levels of nicotine and so fast to the brain. So that has been raised as a concern. So Kelsey or Reid, would you have any comments to that? And it ties to one of the questions that from comment from Karen Compton.
I think we don't understand the dangers of these products very well, and we need to, because they're being used pretty widely, and I think they really are dangerous. It does make me wonder, Lauren, to what extent, like child farm workers who are exposed to nicotine like regularly, when they stop working in the fields, do they suffer like withdrawal? Because they may be addicted just from occupational exposure. But I don't think anybody's looked at that possibility.
I would suspect maybe someone has. I have not.
Yeah.
But I wonder if someone like Marty or Tanyas, for example, I know he is. So, and he asked an interesting question. He asked about, and I think it's something. And in the tobacco treaty, we're very fortunate. We have an Article 17, that deals with alternative livelihoods. But the question is, in the short term, and for those communities that are often in situations close to poverty, so in some cases they're in some states of almost indentured servitude in some cases, how can we help them transition out of growing tobacco?
We have to provide alternative livelihoods, I think, like in the agriculture space, other crops that are less dangerous, that might be more lucrative. We have to help these folks figure out how not to grow this product that is harming their health.
Kelsey, would you like to anything to add to this?
I just saw that Marty's comment included why aren't we sort of working towards collective bargaining and
Bargaining, yep.
unionization? I think it's a great idea. I think it's a little bit maybe above my pay grade, Marty, but I think someone should do it. I think that anything that can be done to help with alternative livelihoods is a great suggestion. And, there's a global food crisis. They should be growing food. We need that instead. So there's lots of other options, and I think it should be a priority within the tobacco control community to focus on that as well.
Yep. Because I remember and tobacco, just tobacco growing we know it's responsible for, understand, about close to 5% of global deforestation every year, for example. It has huge impact. And as you point out, it's also stakes. I can't remember what percentage of arable land, but it's a significant percentage of land that could be used for food production. We only have a few minutes left, so we'd like to give an opportunity for both of you to say a few last words before we say goodbye to our audience. So Kelsey, I'll let you give your first, and then to Reid Maki, our guest, will have the last words. So Kelsey, you first.
Sure. I just wanted to thank everyone for attending today, and I wanted to once again highlight the intersections here. There's so many names on here that I recognize from the tobacco control community, and I think as a community, we need to do a better job breaking down these silos and working with all of these issues so that we can achieve a real tobacco endgame. Because as we've brought up several times, they're interrelated, and we can't just pick one at a time. We have to solve them all. Reid, I just wanted to again congratulate you on your retirement and thank you for coming.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I guess my final comment is that I've been doing work on this issue for 30 years, but more focused work for the last 12, and I'm just shocked that it's still a problem. It just seems like it doesn't pass the common sense test. If you ask like the average person, like should 12 and 13 and 14, 15-year-old kids be working in tobacco fields where they get sick? I think everybody would say no, that's crazy. Yet somehow with a combination of a farm lobby and other corporate interests, all of the things that countervailing pressures have made it really hard for us to achieve this. But I think it will happen eventually in the U.S. I don't know when, but I'm looking forward to that day.
Well, thank you, Reid, and so thank you so much again for joining us today. Unfortunately, the problem is not over. There's this perception that as we're no longer assaulted to tobacco smoke, sometimes we go to restaurants and so on and so forth. But as you point out, the problem is not over yet. I think there's a lot left to do. Unfortunately, too many children will still fall victims to this product, and too many humans will still be harmed. Humans, the environment, even wildlife and others will be harmed by those products. So thank you all for the efforts you do to have a safer and healthier world for all of us and our children and our youth. Just want to, we have a few webinars coming up. We have one in Spanish, also Fin del Tabaco, that will be in Spanish. I'm not so sure we'll have a simultaneous interpretation for that one. That's on April 23rd. We have on April 15 a live discussion on tobacco and endgame. We encourage you also to sign up for that. And we have a lot of other exciting webinars coming up on on a variety of issues. We have one with the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights coming up in a few months, also in April, towards the end of April, I believe. So also watch out for that. We'll have wonderful speakers for this. So again, thank you everyone for joining us today. Reid Maki, thank you so much for joining us, and I wish you the best in your upcoming retirement, and I hope you will continue that to still support and work with us for a healthier world. So thank you so much to all of you. And
thank you.